The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while I was curled up on my couch in my small apartment in Denver, watching the autumn leaves drift past my window. I'd just gotten home from my job at the library, my feet aching from a long day of shelving books and helping patrons find what they needed. The caller ID showed my mother's number, and I felt that familiar twist in my stomach that always accompanied her calls. "Madison, honey, I need you to come early on Friday to help set up for the dinner party," she said without preamble, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was in full planning mode. I could hear pots clanging in the background and knew she was already deep into preparations. I shifted the phone to my other ear, confusion washing over me. "What dinner party on Friday?" I asked, setting down my cup of chamomile tea. The ceramic mug clinked softly against the coffee table, a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden tension. "Oh, didn't I tell you? Connor's getting promoted to senior partner at the firm. We're having a celebration dinner with his colleagues and some important clients. It's going to be quite the affair," she explained, and I could practically see her bustling around her pristine kitchen, checking lists and arranging flowers. "That's wonderful news about Connor," I said, genuinely happy for my older brother despite everything. "So what time should I be there?" I was already mentally rearranging my Friday evening plans, which had consisted of nothing more exciting than finishing a novel I'd been reading and maybe trying that new bubble bath I'd bought. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when my mother spoke again, her voice had taken on that careful quality I knew all too well. "Well, Madison, the dinner is really for Connor's professional circle. You know how these things are, very formal, lots of shop talk. I don't think you'd really enjoy it, dear." The words hung in the air between us, and I felt that familiar sting of rejection that had become so commonplace over the years. I wasn't being invited to my own brother's celebration dinner, but of course that didn't mean they didn't need me. "But I still need you to come help set everything up," she continued, her voice brightening as if she hadn't just excluded me from yet another family event. "You have such a wonderful eye for detail, Madison. The table needs to be perfect, and you know how I get flustered with all those place settings and wine glasses. Could you come around 3:30? That should give us plenty of time before the guests arrive at 6. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 28 years of similar conversations pressing down on me. "Madison, can you help serve at your father's retirement party? Madison, we need you to clean up after Connor's graduation celebration. Madison, could you watch the coats during the holiday party? Always the helper, never the guest." "Of course, Mum," I heard myself saying, even as anger simmered beneath my calm exterior. 3:30 on Friday, I'll be there." "Wonderful! And Madison, could you stop by that specialty store on Broadway and pick up some of those fancy napkins? The cream-colored ones with the gold trim. We might run out of the ones I have. I'll reimburse you, of course." "Sure," I said, though we both knew she'd forget about the reimbursement, just like she always did. "You're such a lifesaver, Madison. I don't know what we'd do without you," she chirped before hanging up, not even waiting for my goodbye. I sat there in the gathering darkness of my apartment, the phone still pressed against my ear even though the line had gone dead. Through my window I could see families walking their dogs, couples holding hands, people living their lives with what seemed like such easy belonging. And here I was, once again relegated to the role of the family's invisible helper. My name is Madison Parker, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the reliable one in my family. Not the successful one, that's my brother Connor with his law degree and his corner office and his seemingly endless string of accomplishments. Not the beautiful one, though my mother never said it quite that directly. Just the reliable one, the one who could always be counted on to show up, help out, and fade into the background when the real guests arrived. I thought moving out of my parents' house in Cherry Creek to my own place downtown would change things. I thought the physical distance would translate into emotional independence. But here I was, 3 years later, still jumping when they called, still accepting whatever crumbs of inclusion they offered while pretending it didn't hurt. I picked up my phone again, noticing a notification from the restaurant app I'd downloaded months ago, but rarely used. Le Jardin, that lovely French bistro I'd been wanting to try, had an opening for Friday night at 7. My finger hovered over the screen as a thought began to form in my mind. What if, just this once, I didn't show up? What if I chose myself instead? Before I could talk myself out of it, I tapped the reservation button. Table for one, Friday at 7, confirmed. A small smile played at the corners of my mouth as I set the phone aside. For once, they could manage without me. Wednesday morning brought the first of what would become an avalanche of text messages. Don't forget about Friday. Need you there by 3:30 sharp. My mother's first message read. I stared at it over my morning coffee, the steam rising from my mug like the frustration building inside me. Throughout the day, more messages followed. Can you also bring the good silver polish? We need the candlesticks to shine. And another thought, could you stop by the florist? I ordered centerpieces but won't have time to pick them up. Each ping of my phone felt like another weight being added to my shoulders, another assumption that my time and energy were infinitely available for their use. My co-worker at the library, Janet, noticed my distraction as we sorted through returned and books. Everything okay, Madison? You seem a million miles away. I gave her a weak smile. Just family stuff. My brother's having a big promotion dinner on Friday. Oh, how nice. Are you excited? She asked, sliding a cookbook into its proper place on the shelf. I'm not actually invited, I admitted, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. But they need me to come set up and help with preparations. Janet stopped what she was doing and turned to look at me, her expression a mixture of surprise and indignation. Wait, what? They want you to work at a party you're not invited to. When she put it like that, it sounded even worse than it had in my head. It's complicated, I said, though even I wasn't sure what was complicated about it. They've always been like this. Connor's the golden child, and I'm just the support staff. That's not right, Madison, Janet said firmly. You deserve better than that. Her words stayed with me for the rest of the day, echoing in my mind as I helped patrons find books, as I organized the children's section, as I walked home through the crisp October air. You deserve better than that. Did I? After 28 years of accepting this treatment, it was hard to imagine deserving anything different. That evening, I called my best friend Sarah. We'd known each other since college, and she'd witnessed firsthand the dynamics of my family. I needed someone to talk to, someone who would understand the weight of what I was considering. Let me get this straight, Sarah said after I'd explained the situation. They want you to come set up, serve and clean up for a fancy dinner party that you're not invited to, for Connor's promotion. That's about the size of it, I confirmed, absently playing with the fringe on my throw pillow. And you're thinking about not showing up? There was a note of excitement in her voice that made me smile despite everything. I made a reservation at Le Jardin instead, I admitted. Table for one, right in the middle of when I should be polishing silver and arranging place cards. Sarah let out a whoop that was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Madison Parker, I am so proud of you. It's about time you stood up for yourself, but is it wrong? I asked, voicing the guilt that had been gnawing at me since I made the reservation. They're counting on me. Mum will be stressed, and the party might not go smoothly. So what? Sarah said bluntly. When have they ever worried about your stress? When have they ever considered how smoothly your life is going? Madison, you've spent years bending over backwards for people who can't even be bothered to include you in family celebrations. You're not wrong for finally choosing yourself. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, Sarah's words mingling with Janet's in my mind. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere out there, people were living lives where their worth wasn't measured solely by their usefulness to others. Maybe it was time I joined them. Thursday brought an escalation in the messages. Mum called twice during my lunch break, which I let go to voicemail. Her messages were increasingly frantic. Madison, just confirming you'll be here tomorrow. We're counting on you. And Madison, did you get my text about the napkins? Please confirm. Connor even chimed in with his typical brotherly charm. Mum says you're helping tomorrow. Don't mess this up. Important people will be there. No pressure, right? I stared at his message, anger flaring hot in my chest. Even now, his concern wasn't whether I was okay with the arrangement, but whether I'd perform my duties adequately enough not to embarrass him. That evening, I treated myself to a long bath with the expensive bath salts I'd been saving for a special occasion. As I soaked in the lavender-scented water, I thought about all the times I'd put my own needs aside for my family. The birthday parties where I'd worked in the kitchen while everyone else celebrated. The holiday dinners where I'd been so busy serving and cleaning that I'd barely tasted the food. The countless evenings and weekends sacrificed to help with events I wasn't deemed important enough to attend as a guest. I'd always told myself it was what family did for each other. But as the hot water eased the tension from my shoulders, I realized the support had only ever flowed in one direction. When was the last time any of them had shown up for me? When I'd graduated from college with honours, they'd been too busy with Connor's law school applications to attend the ceremony. When I'd gotten my job at the library, a position I'd worked hard for and was proud of, my mother's only comment had been that it was nice I'd found something stable, even if it wasn't particularly ambitious. By the time I got out of the bath, my skin was pruned and my resolve was solid. I wasn't going to spend another evening being invisible in my own family. I deserved to be seen, to be valued, to be included. And if they couldn't do that, then they didn't deserve my help. Friday dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect Colorado autumn days that made the mountains look like they'd been painted against the sky. I took my time getting ready for work, choosing my favorite cardigan and taking extra care with my makeup. If I was going to rebel against family expectations, I might as well look good doing it. My phone started ringing at exactly 3:30. I watched my mother's name flash on the screen, counting the rings before it went to voicemail. 5 minutes later, she called again, then again. By 4 o'clock, the texts started coming fast and furious. "Madison, where are you? We're waiting. The guests will be here in 2 hours. This is unacceptable. Call me immediately. Your father is trying to help, but he doesn't know where anything is." I turned my phone to silent and tucked it into my desk drawer. For the rest of my shift, I focused on helping library patrons, recommending books, and organizing the weekend Storytime schedule. The familiar routine was soothing, a reminder that I had a life outside my family's demands. At 5:30, I left work and headed home to get ready for dinner. I took my time, choosing the emerald green dress I'd bought on sale last year but had never had occasion to wear. It fit perfectly, the colour bringing out the hazel in my eyes. I styled my auburn hair in loose waves and applied my lipstick with care. Looking in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. This wasn't Madison, the reliable helper. This was Madison, the woman who deserved to eat at nice restaurants and be treated with respect. The drive to Le Jardin took me past my parents' neighborhood, and I couldn't help but imagine the scene unfolding there. Mum would be in full panic mode, Dad would be trying to help but probably making things worse, and Connor would be annoyed that his perfect evening might be less than perfect. For a brief moment, guilt tried to claw its way back in. Then I remembered Connor's text about not messing things up, and I pressed a little harder on the accelerator. Le Jardin was everything I'd hoped it would be. Soft lighting, elegant decor, and the sound of quiet conversation and clinking glasses. The hostess showed me to a lovely table by the window, and I felt a thrill of excitement as I settled into my seat. This was what it felt like to choose yourself, to prioritize your own happiness. "Good evening, mademoiselle," the waiter said with a warm smile. "Can I start you with something to drink?" "I'd like a glass of your house red, please," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "And I'll need a few minutes with the menu." "Of course, take your time. You're here to enjoy yourself." As he walked away, I almost laughed at the irony. Here, in this restaurant where no one knew me, I was encouraged to enjoy myself. At my own family's dinner party, I would have been encouraged to stay out of sight. The wine arrived, deep and rich and perfect. I took a sip, savouring the warmth that spread through me. Around me, other diners were engaged in their own worlds. A couple at the next table was clearly on an anniversary dinner, their hands intertwined over the candlelight. A group of women across the room burst into laughter at some shared joke. And here I was, alone, but not lonely, finally taking up space in the world. Meanwhile, 20 minutes away in Cherry Creek, chaos was undoubtedly reigning. I could picture it perfectly because I'd seen it so many times before. My mother would be wearing her favorite hostess dress, the navy one with the pearl buttons, but her usual composure would be cracking. My father would be fumbling with the wine opener, muttering under his breath about why they had to have so many different types of glasses. And Connor would be pacing, checking his watch, his jaw tight with irritation. The doorbell would ring right at 6 because Connor's colleagues were nothing if not punctual, and my mother would have to greet them with the table half set, the appetizers still in the refrigerator, and the candles unlit. I took another sip of wine, surprised to find that imagining their distress brought less satisfaction than I'd expected. Mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of always being the one to smooth things over, to make things perfect, to ensure everyone else's comfort at the expense of my own. My phone, tucked away in my purse, vibrated insistently. I ignored it, turning my attention instead to the menu. Everything looked wonderful, and I realized with a start that I could order whatever I wanted. No one would comment on the price or my choice. No one would expect me to help clear plates or refill water glasses. I could simply sit here and enjoy a meal like any other paying customer. When the waiter returned, I ordered the duck confit with confidence. I'd always wanted to try it, but had never had the chance. Family dinners were always about Connor's preferences or what would impress my parents' friends. Tonight, it was just about what Madison wanted. As I waited for my meal, I finally pulled out my phone to check the damage. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages. The most recent one, from my father, simply said, "We need to talk about this, Madison. This isn't like you." He was right, of course. This wasn't like me. The Madison they knew would have been there at 3:29, silver polish in hand, ready to transform their dining room into something magazine-worthy. She would have spent the evening in the kitchen, making sure every course was perfectly timed, every glass was full, every need was anticipated before it was voiced. She would have smiled and said it was her pleasure when her mother thanked her absently, already thinking about the next event. But that Madison was tired. That Madison had realized, sitting in her bathtub the night before, that she'd spent 28 years auditioning for a role in her family that she was never going to get. No amount of perfect table settings or flawlessly executed dinners was going to transform her from the helper into the guest of honor. Or even just a guest. My duck arrived and it was perfect. The skin was crispy, the meat tender and flavorful. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, letting the restaurant's atmosphere wash over me. This was what I'd been missing all those nights spent in my parents' kitchen, the simple pleasure of enjoying a meal without obligation or expectation. As I was contemplating dessert, a text from Sarah popped up. "How's the rebellion going, revolutionary?" I smiled, typing back, "Currently enjoying duck confit while my family presumably fumbles through dinner prep, feeling surprisingly okay about it." Her response was immediate. "You're my hero. Seriously, Madison, this is huge." She was right. It was huge. 28 years of patterns didn't break easily. But sitting here, in this lovely restaurant, being treated like someone who mattered simply because I existed, not because of what I could do for others, I felt something shift inside me. A tiny crack in the wall I'd built around my own needs and desires. The waiter approached with the dessert menu. "The chocolate soufflé is our specialty," he said with a conspiratorial smile. "It takes 20 minutes to prepare, but I promise it's worth the wait." "That sounds perfect," I said, handing back the menu. "I've got nowhere else to be." And it was true. For the first time in my adult life, I had nowhere else to be but right where I was. No family obligations pulling me away from my own life. No one waiting for me to solve their problems or smooth their way. Just Madison, a glass of wine, and a chocolate soufflé on the way. Back at the house, the dinner party was limping along without me. I learned the details later, pieced together from various family members' accounts, each one coloured by their own perspective and frustration. The table had eventually been set, though my father had mixed up the salad forks with the dinner forks, a mistake my mother discovered only after the first guests had arrived. The candles had been lit, but they were the wrong ones. Everyday candles instead of the elegant tapered ones my mother had bought specifically for the occasion. Connor's boss, Mr. Richardson, had arrived with his wife, a woman known for her exacting standards and sharp tongue. She'd taken one look at the haphazardly arranged table and raised an eyebrow that spoke volumes. My mother, flustered and already off her game, had apologized profusely, mentioning that their usual help had failed to show up. It was only later that she realized how that must have sounded, reducing me to the help in front of strangers. The appetizers had come out late and slightly warm, the cheese sweating unappetizingly on the crackers. Connor had tried to cover by being extra charming, refilling wine glasses with an enthusiasm that bordered on desperate. But charm could only go so far when the entire evening felt off-kilter, like a song played in the wrong key. My father, bless him, had tried his best. But his best involved forgetting to serve the soup course entirely, jumping straight from appetizers to the main course in a way that left the carefully planned menu in shambles. The beef tenderloin, which my mother had spent a small fortune on, was overcooked because no one had thought to check it while they were scrambling to plate the salads. Through it all, Connor maintained his professional smile, but those who knew him could see the tension in his jaw, the way his laugh was just a little too loud, a little too forced. This was supposed to be his night, his celebration, his chance to impress the senior partners and solidify his position at the firm. Instead, it was quickly becoming the kind of evening that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons, Mrs. Richardson, never one to suffer in silence, had made several pointed comments about the service, or lack thereof. "Is it so hard to find good help these days?" she'd asked, looking directly at my mother. "I suppose you have to make do with what you can get." The words hung in the air like a rebuke, and my mother had flushed deep red, mumbling something about unexpected circumstances. The worst part, Connor would tell me later, was that everyone could tell something was missing. It wasn't just the fumbled service or the overcooked meat. It was the absence of that invisible presence that had always made their dinner parties run smoothly. The person who noticed when a water glass was empty, who seamlessly cleared plates between courses, who kept conversation flowing with perfectly timed interruptions. Without me there, the mechanics of the evening were exposed, clunky and obvious. By the time my soufflé arrived at Le Jardin, the dinner party was winding down to a merciful close. Guests were making excuses about early mornings and long drives. The universal code for this evening has been uncomfortable and I want to leave. Connor was helping them with their coats, his movements sharp with barely contained frustration. My parents were in the kitchen, surveying the disaster of dirty dishes and wine-stained tablecloths, the detritus of an evening gone wrong. The soufflé was everything the waiter had promised, light and airy with a molten chocolate centre that was pure indulgence. I ate it slowly, letting each spoonful melt on my tongue. Around me, the restaurant hummed with contentment, other diners enjoying their own moments of pleasure. I thought about all the desserts I'd served, but never tasted, too busy making sure everyone else's evening was perfect to enjoy my own. When the check came, I paid it without wincing, even though the total was more than I usually spent on groceries for a week. This evening wasn't about being practical or responsible. It was about claiming my worth, about insisting that I deserved to sit at the table, not just set it. As I gathered my things to leave, the waiter smiled warmly. "I hope you enjoyed your evening, mademoiselle. Please come again soon." "I will," I promised, meaning it. "Thank you for a lovely evening." Outside, the October air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of falling leaves and distant wood smoke. I walked to my car slowly, in no hurry to return to reality. My phone had finally stopped buzzing, and I wondered if they'd given up or if they were simply too busy dealing with the aftermath to keep calling. The drive home took me past the city lights, each window a small story of lives being lived. I thought about the couple at the restaurant, celebrating their anniversary, the group of women laughing together, the businessman dining alone with his newspaper. All of them had seemed so comfortable taking up space in the world, claiming their right to be served, to be catered to matter. Why had that always felt so impossible for me? Back at my apartment, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of water. The silence was peaceful, not lonely. I'd expected to feel guilty, anxious about the chaos I'd caused. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: free. Free from the weight of constant obligation. Free from the need to make myself small so others could shine. Free to be Madison, not just the reliable sister, the helpful daughter, the one who could always be counted on to make things work. My phone rang one more time as I was getting ready for bed. This time it was Connor, and something made me answer. "Where the hell were you?" he demanded without preamble. "Do you have any idea what you put us through tonight?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I was having dinner at Le Jardin. The duck was excellent, thanks for asking." There was a pause on the other end, as if he couldn't quite process what I'd said. "You went to a restaurant while we were here scrambling to put together my promotion dinner? Are you insane?" "No, Connor," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "I'm not insane. I'm just tired of being excluded from family events, but still expected to make them happen. You didn't want me there as a guest, so I decided not to be there at all." "That's completely different," he sputtered. "You know these work things aren't really your scene. We were doing you a favor by letting me serve your colleagues instead of meeting them, by having me set the table for a celebration of your success that I wasn't important enough to actually celebrate." "Some favor, Connor. You're being selfish," he said, his voice hard. "Mum knocked herself out planning this dinner, and you ruined it." "No," I said firmly. "I chose to have dinner at a nice restaurant instead of working for free at an event I wasn't invited to. If that ruined your evening, maybe you should think about why my unpaid labor was so essential to your success." I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding but my conscience clear. This was what setting boundaries felt like. Uncomfortable, unfamiliar, but ultimately right. Sleep came easier than I expected that night. I'd thought I'd lie awake replaying the evening, second-guessing my choices, imagining all the ways I could have handled it differently. Instead, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that comes from finally laying down a burden you've carried for too long. I woke Saturday morning to sunlight streaming through my windows and the unusual sound of silence from my phone. No urgent texts demanding my attention. No voicemails outlining the day's obligations. Just blessed quiet and the freedom to decide how to spend my own weekend. I made myself a proper breakfast for once. Scrambled eggs and toast with jam, eaten slowly at my small dining table, instead of grabbed hastily on the way out the door to help with someone else's project. The coffee tasted better when it wasn't gulped between tasks. The morning felt longer when it wasn't already spoken for by family demands. Around 10, my father called. This time, something in my gut told me to answer. "Madison," he said, his voice softer than I'd expected. "Can we talk?" "Hi, Dad," I said, settling onto my couch with my second cup of coffee. "How was the rest of the dinner party?" He sighed heavily. "It was rough, sweetheart. Your mother is upset. Connor is furious. But I think maybe we needed this wake-up call." I blinked, surprised by his words. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said slowly, as if working through the thoughts as he spoke, "that your mother and I were up late talking last night. Really talking for the first time in a while. About you, about how we've treated you, about why you felt you had to do what you did. And Madison, I'm ashamed to say we finally understood." My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "What did you understand?" "That we've taken you for granted," he said simply. "That we've treated you like hired help instead of our daughter. That we've let Connor's career become so important that we forgot you have a life and dreams of your own." "I'm sorry, sweetheart. We're both sorry." I had to set the coffee down because my hands were shaking. In 28 years, I couldn't remember either of my parents apologizing to me for anything substantial. "Thank you for saying that, Dad. It means a lot. We want to make this right," he continued. "Your mother wants to talk to you too, when you're ready. But I wanted to call first to let you know that we hear you, we see what we've done, and we want to change." After we hung up, I sat in the morning light, processing this unexpected development. I'd been prepared for anger, for guilt trips, for the silent treatment. I hadn't been prepared for understanding, for accountability, for the possibility of change. Sarah came over that afternoon, armed with wine and an eager desire to hear every detail of my rebellion. I told her about the restaurant, the perfect duck, the chocolate souffle. I told her about Connor's angry call and my father's surprising one. I told her how it felt to choose myself for once, to insist on my own worth. "I am so proud of you," she said, raising her glass in a toast. To Madison Parker, who finally remembered she's a whole person, not just a supporting character in everyone else's story. We clinked glasses and I felt the truth of her words settle into my bones. That's exactly what I'd been, a supporting character always facilitating someone else's big moment, never claiming my own. But last night had been the beginning of a different story, one where Madison got to be the protagonist of her own life. The next few days passed quietly. I went to work, came home, lived my life without the constant interruption of family demands. It felt strange at first, like a phantom limb, the absence of that constant tug of obligation. But gradually, I began to appreciate the space, the quiet, the freedom to make decisions based solely on what I wanted or needed. On Wednesday, my mother finally called. I'd been expecting it, but my stomach still clenched when I saw her name on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, giving myself time to breathe. "Madison," she said, and I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, so different from her usual commanding tone. "Your father said he talked to you. I was hoping we could meet for coffee, just the two of us." I considered this, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to maintain the distance, to protect the boundaries I'd so recently established. But another part was curious about what she had to say, whether real change was possible. "Okay," I said finally. "How about Friday afternoon?" "There's a coffee shop on 6th Street, the Blue Door." "I know it," she said quickly. 2 o'clock. I'll be there." Friday came quickly, and I found myself nervously adjusting my scarf as I waited for her at a corner table. The Blue Door was one of my favorite spots, cozy and welcoming with mismatched furniture and the constant hum of the espresso machine. I'd chosen it deliberately, wanting to meet on neutral ground, somewhere that felt like mine. She arrived right on time, looking uncertain in a way I'd never seen before. My mother had always been the definition of confidence, striding through life with the assurance of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and how to do it. But today she hesitated at the door, scanning the room until she found me. "Madison," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course, Mum." We ordered our drinks, the familiar ritual providing a buffer against the awkwardness. When the barista delivered them, my mother wrapped her hands around her cup as if drawing strength from its warmth. "I owe you an apology," she began, meeting my eyes with difficulty. "Your father and I both do, but I especially. I've been thinking all week about what you did, what you said to Connor, and I realized something painful. We've been terrible to you, haven't we?" I took a sip of my latte, considering my words carefully. "You've taken me for granted," I said finally. "For years, I've been the one who shows up, helps out, makes things work, but I'm never valued as anything more than that. Do you know what it's like to always be good enough to work at family events, but never good enough to be a guest?" She winced, and I saw genuine pain flash across her face. "I told myself it was different," she said quietly. "I told myself you were shy, that you preferred being behind the scenes. But that wasn't true, was it? We excluded you and then expected you to facilitate our exclusion of you. God, Madison, I'm so sorry." The words hung between us, and I felt years of hurt and resentment begin to shift, like tectonic plates realigning. "Why?" I asked, needing to understand. Why was Connor always worth celebrating, while I was only worth what I could contribute? She was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee absently. "I think," she said slowly, "that I got caught up in a story I was telling myself. Connor was the achiever, the one who was going places, and you were the steady one, the reliable one. I put you both in boxes and never let you out. I never stopped to question whether those boxes were fair or if they were what either of you actually wanted. I wasn't just reliable, Mum, I said, feeling brave enough to push. I graduated summa cum laude. I got a job I love at the library. I have friends, interests, a life. But none of that ever seemed to matter as much as Connor's latest promotion or his newest client. You're right, she said, and I was startled to see tears in her eyes. I missed so much, didn't I? I was so focused on one definition of success that I couldn't see the daughter right in front of me. The one who was building a life of meaning and purpose, just in a quieter way than her brother. We talked for 2 hours that afternoon, really talked in a way we hadn't in years, maybe ever. She asked about my job, seeming genuinely interested when I told her about the literacy program I was developing for underserved kids. She asked about my friends, my apartment, my dreams for the future. It felt strange to be the focus of her attention, to be seen as a whole person rather than just a helpful pair of hands. I want to change, Madison, she said as we prepared to leave. I know it won't happen overnight, and I know I'll probably mess up. But I want to do better. We both do. You deserve to be celebrated, not just utilized. I appreciated her words, even as I maintained a healthy skepticism. Change was hard, and family patterns were the hardest to break. But the fact that she was trying, that she could see what had been wrong, felt like a start. Over the next few weeks, I watched my family attempt to navigate this new dynamic with varying degrees of success. My father was the most natural, calling to chat about books he was reading or to get my opinion on current events. He seemed genuinely delighted to discover that I had thoughts and opinions beyond party planning and table settings. My mother struggled more, often falling back into old patterns before catching herself. She'd start to ask me to help with something, then stop mid-sentence, uncertainty clouding her features. Madison, I was wondering she'd begin, then pause. No, never mind, I should handle it myself. It's okay to ask for help sometimes, Mum, I told her during one of these moments. The difference is between asking for help and assuming I'll always provide it, between including me in the work and the celebration. She nodded, filing this away, trying to learn new ways of being. It was awkward and imperfect, but it was progress. Connor was the holdout, his pride too wounded to admit any fault. He avoided me for weeks, communicating only through terse texts when absolutely necessary. But even he couldn't maintain his anger forever, especially when it became clear that our parents were serious about changing the family dynamic. The real test came a month later when my mother called about Thanksgiving plans. Madison, she said, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. We'd like to have Thanksgiving at the house this year. Would you like to come? As our guest, she added quickly, just to enjoy the meal and the company. No helping required. In fact, I insist you don't help. I smiled at the earnestness in her voice. That sounds nice, Mum. Can I bring anything? Just yourself, she said firmly. That's all we want. Thanksgiving arrived with the kind of crisp, clear weather that made Colorado shine. I dressed carefully, choosing a rust-colored sweater that brought out the warmth in my complexion. As I drove to my parents' house, I felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. This would be the first family gathering since my rebellion, the first test of whether real change was possible. I arrived to find my mother stationed firmly in the kitchen, having apparently hired help for the evening. Madison, she said, hugging me warmly, I'm so glad you're here. Connor's in the living room with your father. Go join them. I'll be out in a minute. But can I help? I began automatically, then caught myself. Old habits died hard. Absolutely not, she said with a smile. Today you're a guest. Go sit down and let someone else take care of things. For once. The evening was strange but wonderful. I sat at the table, a glass of wine in hand, participating in conversation instead of constantly jumping up to refill dishes or clear plates. My father asked about the library's holiday programs, actually listening to my response. My mother shared stories from her book club, including me in the laughter. Even Connor, though still somewhat stiff, made an effort to engage. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments when my mother would start to ask me to do something, then catch herself. Times when Connor's jaw would tighten, as if remembering his disrupted promotion dinner. Moments when I had to physically stop myself from jumping up to help, the ingrained patterns of a lifetime, hard to break. But it was progress, real, tangible progress toward a different kind of family dynamic. One where I wasn't just the behind-the-scenes helper, but an actual member of the family, worthy of celebration and inclusion. After dinner, as we sat around the living room with coffee and pie, my mother raised her glass. "I want to propose a toast," she said, looking directly at me, "to Madison, who had the courage to teach us all an important lesson. That family means valuing each other for who we are, not just what we can do. We're grateful you're here, sweetheart, as our daughter, our sister, our family, not our helper, just our Madison." I blinked back unexpected tears as everyone raised their glasses. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental. An acknowledgement of my worth that had nothing to do with my usefulness. A recognition that I belonged at the table, not just in the kitchen. As the evening wound down and I prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you, kiddo," he said quietly. "Not just for standing up to us, though that took guts, but for who you are. The life you've built, the work you do, the person you've become. We should have been telling you that all along." "Thanks, Dad," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. The drive home was quiet, but my heart was full. Change wasn't easy, and I knew there would be setbacks. Old patterns would resurface, boundaries would be tested, and we'd all have to keep choosing to do better. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was truly part of my family, not as their assistant or helper, but as myself. Madison Parker, worthy of love and respect simply for existing. Back at my apartment, I found myself thinking about that night at Le Jardin. How different things might have been if I'd never made that reservation. If I'd shown up as expected to set tables and serve food at a party I wasn't invited to. That one act of rebellion had set everything in motion, had forced all of us to examine the roles we'd been playing and decide if we wanted to keep playing them. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the reservation app. Without hesitation, I booked another table at Le Jardin, this time for the following Friday. Because choosing yourself wasn't a one-time thing. It was a practice, a habit, a commitment to believing in your own worth. And I intended to keep choosing myself, keep taking up space, keep insisting on my place at the table. The journey toward healthier family dynamics continued over the following months, with all the messiness and imperfection that real change entails. There were good days when I felt truly seen and valued, days when my mother called just to chat, not to ask for anything, days when Connor texted a funny meme or asked my opinion on something. Days when my father and I had long conversations about books and ideas, the kind of talks I'd always craved but never thought possible. But there were difficult days too, days when old patterns reasserted themselves with a vengeance. Like the time my mother called in a panic about a charity luncheon she was hosting, automatically assuming I'd drop everything to help. I had to remind her gently but firmly that I had work, that I couldn't leave the library in the middle of the day to arrange centerpieces. The hurt in her voice was familiar, but I held my ground. Boundaries weren't cruel, they were necessary. Or the time Connor got engaged and immediately assigned me duties for the engagement party before even asking if I was free that weekend. I had to have another difficult conversation about the difference between being asked and being told, between being included and being utilized. He didn't take it well initially, but eventually, grudgingly, he came around. The biggest test came 6 months after that pivotal dinner party when Connor and his fiancée, Jessica, were planning their wedding. I braced myself for the inevitable assumptions that I would be their unpaid wedding coordinator, but to my surprise, they approached things differently. "Madison, we'd like to ask you something," Jessica said over lunch one day. "We'd love for you to be a bridesmaid." "Just a bridesmaid," she added quickly, seeing my expression. "We're hiring a wedding planner and everything. We just want you there to celebrate with us." I was touched, genuinely moved by the invitation and the awareness behind it. But I also knew that wedding planning had a way of blurring boundaries, of turning family members into free labor regardless of intentions. "I'd love to be a bridesmaid," I said carefully, "but I need us all to be clear that that's all I'm doing. I'm not the backup planner or the day of coordinator. I'm there to support you emotionally and celebrate with you, not to work your wedding." Jessica nodded immediately. Connor looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. "Understood," Jessica said. "We want you to enjoy the day as much as we do." And to everyone's credit, they stuck to that agreement. There were moments of temptation, times when my mother would start to suggest I could just help with this one little thing, but I held firm, and eventually they stopped asking. On the wedding day, I stood with the other bridesmaids, my only job to smile and celebrate my brother's happiness. It felt revolutionary, being present at a family event purely as a participant. The changes rippled out in other ways, too. My parents started inviting me to dinners where I was explicitly told not to help. They began introducing me to their friends not as their helpful daughter, but as Madison, who works at the library, Madison, who runs literacy programs, Madison, who just got back from a trip to Portland. My identity in their eyes expanded beyond my usefulness, and with it, my sense of self grew too. I started dating someone, a kind man named David, who I met at a book reading at the library. For the first time, I felt confident introducing someone to my family, knowing they would see me as a whole person worthy of love, not just someone useful to have around. David was welcomed warmly, and I watched my family interact with him, seeing me through his eyes as someone valuable and interesting. The lessons I learned from that night at Le Jardin extended beyond my family too. I became better at setting boundaries at work, saying no to extra projects that would overwhelm me, advocating for myself during performance reviews. I deepened friendships, no longer always being the one who gave without receiving. I started taking art classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never felt I had time for when I was constantly at my family's beck and call. One evening, about a year after that fateful dinner party, I found myself back at Le Jardin. This time, I wasn't alone. My parents, Connor and Jessica, and David were all with me, celebrating my promotion to head of youth services at the library. As we raised our glasses in a toast, I thought about how far we'd all come. To Madison, my father said, his voice warm with pride, who reminds us every day that success comes in many forms, and that the quietest achievements are often the most meaningful. To Madison, my mother added, who had the courage to teach her stubborn family that love means seeing people for who they are, not what they can do for you. Even Connor raised his glass with a genuine smile. To my sister, who always had a backbone of steel. It just took the rest of us a while to notice. As I looked around the table at these people who had learned, slowly and imperfectly but sincerely, to see me and value me, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. We still had our moments, our regressions, our old patterns that tried to reassert themselves. But because we were all trying, all growing, all choosing to do better. The waiter appeared with our appetizers, the same one who had served me that night a year ago when I dined alone. He caught my eye and smiled, a look of recognition passing between us. "Enjoy your meal," he said to the table, but his eyes were on me. "All of you, together." "Thank you," I said, meaning it deeply. "We will," and we did. We enjoyed the meal and each other's company as equals, as family, as people who had learned that everyone deserves a seat at the table. The girl who had once set tables while others dined now sat among them, finally, where she belonged. Not because she had earned it through service, but because she had always deserved it simply by being herself. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing my family with new eyes. My mother, who had once been so rigid in her expectations, now laughed freely, asking Jessica about her work as a pediatric nurse with genuine interest. My father, who had often been passive in family dynamics, now actively ensured everyone was included in conversations. Connor, whose self-absorption had once been legendary, actually asked David thoughtful questions about his work in environmental law. These weren't the same people who had expected me to disappear into the kitchen a year ago. Or rather, they were the same people, but they had chosen to grow, to examine their assumptions, to do the hard work of changing ingrained patterns. It gave me hope, not just for our family, but for the possibility of change in general. If the Parkers could learn new ways of being after nearly 3 decades of dysfunction, anything was possible. After dinner, as we walked to our cars, my mother pulled me aside. "Madison, can I tell you something?" "Of course, Mum." She took a deep breath, seeming to gather her courage. "I've been seeing a therapist. Your father and I both have. After that night when you didn't show up, we realized we had a lot to work through. Not just about you, but about our whole family dynamic, about why we fell into those patterns in the first place." I was stunned. My parents seeking therapy. They'd always been the type to believe that family business stayed within the family, that outsiders couldn't understand their particular situation. "That's wonderful, Mum. How's it going?" "It's hard," she admitted, "uncomfortable. We're having to look at things about ourselves we've avoided for years. But it's good too. Necessary. I'm learning a lot about why I put so much pressure on Connor to achieve, why I couldn't see your achievements as equally valuable. It goes back to my own childhood, to messages I received about what mattered, what made someone worthy of attention and celebration." We stood there in the parking lot, the night air crisp around us, having the kind of honest conversation I'd never imagined possible with my mother. She shared more about her therapy insights, about recognizing how her own mother had valued sons over daughters, achievement over kindness, external success over internal worth. How she'd unconsciously replicated those patterns despite believing herself to be more evolved. "I'm not making excuses," she said firmly. "What we did to you was wrong, regardless of where it came from. But understanding the why helps me make sure I don't slip back into old habits. Helps me catch myself when I start to value doing over being." "Thank you for sharing this with me," I said, feeling a rush of compassion for this woman who was trying so hard to change lifelong patterns. "It means a lot to know you're taking it seriously." "How could I not?" she said, tears glinting in her eyes. "I almost lost my daughter. Not physically, but emotionally. You were pulling away, and you had every right to. If you hadn't stood up for yourself that night, hadn't forced us to see what we were doing, we might have lost you entirely, and we would have deserved it." We hugged then, standing in that parking lot, 2 women who were learning how to be mother and daughter in a new way. It wasn't perfect. It might never be perfect, but it was real and honest, and built on mutual respect rather than obligation. The ripples of change continued to spread. Connor, perhaps influenced by our parents' example, started examining his own behaviors. He and Jessica attended premarital counseling, where he was forced to confront his tendencies towards self-centeredness and entitlement. It wasn't an easy process for him, but Jessica was worth it. And slowly, he began to understand how his actions affected others. I watched my brother struggle with these realizations, saw him grapple with shame and defensiveness before finally moving toward genuine accountability. He called me one evening, months after the wedding, to apologize properly for the years of dismissiveness and disrespect. "I was a terrible brother," he said simply. "I treated you like staff instead of family. I let Mum and Dad do it too, even encouraged it sometimes. I'm sorry, Madison. You deserved better from all of us, but especially from me. I should have stood up for you, should have insisted you be included. Instead, I benefited from your exclusion and never questioned it. That was wrong." It was another conversation I'd never imagined having, another sign that real change was possible. I accepted his apology while also maintaining my boundaries, making it clear that while I appreciated his words, it was his actions going forward that would truly matter. As my 29th birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The woman who had sat alone at Le Jardin, choosing herself for the first time, felt like a different person. Or maybe not different, maybe just finally visible, finally taking up the space she'd always deserved. My family insisted on throwing me a birthday party, and I watched with amusement and affection as they navigated the planning. They hired a caterer, delegated tasks among themselves, and repeatedly assured me that all I needed to do was show up and enjoy. The party itself was small but perfect, held in my parents' backyard with close family and friends. As I blew out the candles on my cake, surrounded by people who saw me and valued me for who I was, I thought about wishes. For so many years, I'd wished to be included, to be seen, to matter beyond my usefulness. Now, those wishes had largely come true, not through magic, but through the hard work of setting boundaries and the willingness of my family to honor them. My new wish was simpler and more complex. I wished for the strength to maintain these changes, to keep choosing myself even when it was difficult. I wished for my family to continue growing and evolving. And I wished for the wisdom to know that my worth had never actually depended on their recognition, that I had always been valuable even when they couldn't see it. Life continued with its usual mixture of challenges and joys. There were holidays and dinners, celebrations and ordinary Tuesday evenings. Through it all, the new dynamics held, strengthened by practice and commitment. We all slipped sometimes, fell back into old patterns. But we caught ourselves more quickly, apologized more readily, and corrected course with less drama. Sarah remained my closest friend and fiercest supporter, the one who reminded me of my worth when I forgot it myself. She often joked that I should teach a class on boundary setting, that my story could help other invisible family members find their voice. While I laughed off the suggestion, part of me wondered if she was right. How many people were out there, setting tables they never got to sit at, facilitating celebrations they weren't invited to join? David became a steady presence in my life, someone who had only ever known me as a person who valued herself. Through his eyes, I saw myself differently, not as someone who had fought for worth, but as someone who had always possessed it. He attended family dinners where I sat as a guest, helped plan gatherings where my only job was to enjoy myself, and marveled at stories of how things used to be. "That seems impossible," he said once after hearing about a particularly egregious example of my former invisibility. "How could they not see how amazing you are?" But the truth was, they hadn't seen because I hadn't demanded to be seen. I had accepted the role they'd assigned me, had shown up repeatedly to play it. It wasn't my fault I'd been cast that way, but my liberation had required my participation. That night at Le Jardin, I'd rewritten the script, and in doing so had given us all the chance to play different parts. 2 years after that pivotal dinner party, Connor and Jessica had their first child, a daughter they named Emma. As I held my niece for the first time, I made her a silent promise. "In this family," I vowed, "you will always be seen. Your worth will never depend on your usefulness. You will be celebrated for who you are, not just what you achieve or how you serve others." And we all kept that promise. Emma grew up in a family that had learned hard lessons about valuing each member equally. She would never know a world where Aunt Madison disappeared into the kitchen during family gatherings. Instead, she would see me at the table, part of every conversation and celebration. It was a small but profound gift, the breaking of a generational pattern. My career flourished as I brought the same energy to my professional life that I'd once reserved for serving others. The youth literacy program I'd developed became a model for libraries across the state. I presented at conferences, wrote articles, and found my voice in spaces far beyond my family. The confidence I'd gained from insisting on my worth at home translated into insisting on my worth everywhere. One day I received an email that made me laugh out loud. It was from a distant cousin who was planning a family reunion and wondered if I could help coordinate everything. "I hear you're amazing at event planning," she wrote. "Everyone says Parker family gatherings run like clockwork thanks to you." I crafted my response carefully with humor, but also clarity. "Thanks for thinking of me. I'd be happy to attend the reunion as a guest. If you need event planning help, I can recommend several excellent professionals who would do a wonderful job for a fair fee." It was a small moment, but it represented everything I'd learned. My skills had value. My time had value. I had value. And I didn't need to prove any of that by giving myself away for free. The reunion happened without my coordination, and by all accounts, it was lovely, if imperfect. I attended with David, introducing him to extended family, sharing stories and laughter. Several relatives commented on how different I seemed, how confident and present. I smiled and thanked them, not bothering to explain the journey that had brought me to this point. Some stories were just for those who had lived them. Time moved forward as it always does, bringing new challenges and celebrations. My father retired and took up woodworking, finally having time for the hobbies he'd put aside for decades. My mother joined a book club that became more like a therapy group, finding deep friendships with women who understood the complexities of changing family dynamics. Connor made partner at his firm, an achievement we celebrated together, with me firmly positioned as a guest at the celebration dinner. Through it all, the lesson I'd learned that night at Le Jardin remained central to how I lived my life. Choosing yourself wasn't selfish, setting boundaries wasn't cruel, insisting on your worth wasn't arrogant. These were acts of self-love that ultimately benefited everyone, creating healthier relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation. I thought often about that version of myself who had almost gone to set up for Connor's dinner party, who had almost continued the pattern of invisibility for another evening, another year, another lifetime. I felt compassion for her, understanding that she had been doing the best she could with the beliefs she'd been given about her place in the world. But I also felt profound gratitude for the moment of clarity that had led me to make a different choice. That reservation at Le Jardin had been more than just a dinner. It had been a declaration of independence, a statement of worth, a line drawn in the sand of my own life. Everything that followed had grown from that single act of choosing myself. 5 years after that night, I found myself once again at Le Jardin. This time I was with Sarah, celebrating her engagement. As we clinked glasses and laughed over shared memories, she brought up that pivotal evening. "I still can't believe you actually did it," she said, grinning. "Just didn't show up. Left them to figure it out themselves." "It was legendary. It was necessary," I corrected gently. "And honestly, it was the kindest thing I could have done for all of us. We were stuck in a toxic pattern that was hurting everyone. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to enable dysfunction anymore." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You know, you inspired me. Watching you set boundaries with your family made me realize I needed to do the same with my boss. Remember how I used to work every weekend, answer emails at midnight, basically have no life outside the office?" I remembered. Sarah's transformation had been almost as dramatic as mine, learning to value her time and energy, insisting on work-life balance. Now she was a senior manager at a different company, one that respected boundaries and valued employees as whole people. "We're boundary-setting queens," I said, raising my glass again. "May we never go back to accepting less than we deserve." "Never," Sarah agreed firmly. As I drove home that night, I thought about all the women and men out there who were still setting tables they never got to sit at, who were pouring their energy into supporting others' dreams while their own withered from neglect, who believed their worth was tied to their usefulness, their value measured only in what they could provide. I wished I could tell them all what I'd learned, that you can't wait for others to see your worth, you have to claim it yourself. That setting boundaries isn't mean, it's necessary. That choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's the foundation of every healthy relationship. That you deserve a seat at the table simply because you exist, not because of what you can contribute. Most importantly, I wished I could tell them that it's never too late to change the story. No matter how long you've played a certain role, no matter how entrenched the patterns, no matter how impossible change seems, you can always choose differently. You can always decide that today is the day you stop being invisible and start being seen. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Family dinner Sunday. You're in charge of showing up and being your wonderful self. We've got everything else covered." "Love you," I smiled, typing back, "Can't wait, love you too." And I meant it. Family dinners were a joy now, filled with real conversation and genuine connection. I showed up as myself, nothing more and nothing less, and that was exactly enough. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I saw my elderly neighbour struggling with grocery bags. Without thinking, I hurried over to help, taking several bags and walking with her to her door. "Thank you, dear," she said gratefully. "You're always so helpful." "Happy to help, Mrs. Chen," I replied, and I was, because helping when you choose to, when it comes from genuine care rather than obligation or a need to prove your worth, feels entirely different. It's a gift freely given, not a tax on your existence. Back in my apartment, I reflected on the distinction. I still helped my family sometimes, still showed up when they needed me. The difference was that now it was a choice, not an expectation. I helped because I wanted to, not because it was the only way to earn my place. And when I couldn't or didn't want to help, I said no without guilt or lengthy explanations. No was a complete sentence, one I'd learned to speak fluently. The journey from that night at Le Jardin to now hadn't been linear. There had been setbacks and struggles, moments when I'd doubted whether real change was possible, times when family members slipped back into old patterns and I had to hold firm to my boundaries, occasions when I myself fell into old habits of overgiving and had to consciously pull back. But through it all, the core truth remained. I was worthy of respect, consideration, and celebration simply because I existed. My value wasn't tied to my productivity or usefulness. I deserved to be seen and heard and included, not as a reward for good behavior, but as a basic human right. The girl who had once believed she had to earn her place in her own family was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth was inherent and non-negotiable. It had taken a failed dinner party and a solo meal at a French restaurant to catalyze the transformation, but the seeds of change had always been there, waiting for the right moment to bloom. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me stood taller than she once had, met her own gaze with confidence rather than apology. She was someone who took up space in the world, who believed she deserved good things, who no longer confused being needed with being loved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to practice the boundaries and self-respect I'd fought so hard to establish. There might be moments of weakness, times when old patterns beckoned with their familiar comfort. But I knew now that I had the strength to choose differently, to keep insisting on my worth even when it was difficult. The story that had begun with a phone call asking me to set a table I wasn't invited to sit at had become something so much bigger. It was a story of transformation, not just mine, but my entire family's. A story of what becomes possible when one person decides they deserve better and has the courage to act on that decision. As sleep began to claim me, my last thought was a prayer of gratitude for that younger version of myself who had been brave enough to make a reservation at Le Jardin instead of showing up to serve others. She had no idea, in that moment of rebellion, that she was setting in motion a revolution that would transform every aspect of her life. But transform it did. And now, 5 years later, I lived a life where I was seen, valued, and celebrated, where I gave from abundance rather than desperation, where I helped because I chose to, not because I had to prove my worth, where I sat at every table as an honored guest, never again relegated to the shadows of servitude. It was a life I'd once thought impossible, but it had been waiting for me all along. All I'd had to do was choose it. Choose myself, and keep choosing myself, day after day, until it became as natural as breathing. The girl who set tables was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth and insisted the world recognize it too. And that, more than any perfectly set table or flawlessly executed dinner party, was the real achievement. The one worth celebrating, the one that mattered most of all.